The Syrian civil war has now been raging for 2 years. More than 100,000 people are dead and millions more are displaced. Earlier this week, I sat down with Kristalina Georgieva, who is a commissioner at the European Union. I asked her about the ongoing conflict in Syria and how the refugee crisis compares to other recent civil wars.
Well, let me start with a comparison with the crisis that we still remember very well, ex-Yugoslavia. Ex-Yugoslavia produced 700,000 refugees and 2 million internally displaced people. Syria already has pushed across borders 1.7 million people. Already over 4 million, probably close to 5 million, are internally displaced. We are in a situation when, if you are looking for a face of this crisis, you're not going to choose a soldier or a rebel. It will be a child, because more than half of the victims inside Syria, more than half of the refugees are children. We are talking about a lost generation. I mean, just imagine the children inside Syria that are affected, that need help. They are more than the whole population of Berlin or Madrid. And that is what makes this crisis particularly heartbreaking. The fact that it is, as always, crises hit the most vulnerable, but that in this case, there is such an enormously negative impact on children. Polio was eradicated from Syria. It has returned in a country that only a short time ago was a middle-income country.
In terms of aid, what is the European Union doing? What are you putting in place in Syria right now?
We have provided so far 1.3 billion euros of humanitarian assistance and support to communities in Lebanon and Jordan affected by the crisis. What we do with this money? Now, just to give you examples. 10 million people inside Syria get access to clean water because of us funding UNICEF and other organizations. 3 million get access to food. We are the largest provider of medical supplies, and more important even than the money we provide, we have been the strongest voice on protection against violence and on respect for international humanitarian law. Only if the political world was to hear us. We have been saying month after month that it is time for the United Nations Security Council to come up with a humanitarian resolution.
But why do you think that hasn't happened yet?
Well, it is very clear that there are very polarized views on what should be the way out of this conflict. And this is what throws a shadow over the humanitarian actions. What we are saying time and again, that we have to be able to stick to the principles of humanitarianism and to set aside the political differences for the sake of saving more lives and reducing suffering. So what we are advocating with our own member states that are members of the Security Council, like France and UK, Luxembourg, but also with everybody else, set aside your political differences. Focus on the humanitarian dimension of this crisis, because if you don't, another Srebrenica can happen, another Rwanda can happen. And we cannot say we have not seen this coming, because we see it coming.
Getting back to the situation there in the region, you've got a massive refugee problem, which is expected to get even worse. There's one humanitarian organization that estimates that by the end of this year, there'll be something like 2 million refugees. So you have the neighboring countries involved as well. Are you active in those countries as well?
Yes. Half of our 1.3 billion euros assistance goes inside Syria. The other half is to support the neighborhood, in particular Jordan and Lebanon. What we do there is to fund the organizations like UNHCR, UNICEF, World Food Programme that are helping refugees. But we also provide assistance to the communities in these countries that are receiving refugees and are getting overwhelmed, and tensions are starting to be affecting these communities. Just to give you one example, in Lebanon, out of the 1,400 cities and villages that have already received refugees, in 30% of them, the refugees are more than the local population. So it is absolutely crucial that we are able to help communities that are receiving refugees as well as to help the refugees themselves.